I don't think we give our feet enough respect for what they do. I mean, admittedly, they're not the most attractive part of our body, and being so far from our brains and our eyes, they can be easily overlooked. But I might want to change that. Today, we're going to move the focus south to our feet. Now, just stop for a moment and take a look at your feet. Do you have a high arch or do you have flat feet? Now, if you've never had any issues with your feet, you might not have noticed, and I'm afraid it isn't something that can be changed overnight. But today, I want to look at whether flat feet have an implication on your running. A flat foot is a foot with no natural arch. So if you look at the foot of a skeleton or a relaxed foot, you should see just that natural curvature on the inside of the underneath of the foot. Now, you may still have signs of a visible arch when you're standing, yet when you go to walk or even running and that increase in force and gravity going down through your foot, then your arch could disappear or your foot rolls inwards. And this is known as overpronation, so that actual movement of the foot. And it's pretty common in runners, so common in fact that if you look at pretty much any shoe brand, they will have a range specifically designed for overpronators that will help support people with that issue with their feet. Now, flat feet can actually cause issues further up the kinetic chain because they're putting different forces on your body. So if you have knee issues or lower back pain, that could be coming from your feet. However, you'll be pleased to know that actually there's no significant injury increase risk from having flat feet for runners, according to the science. So what category do your feet fit into? Well, to demonstrate this, we thought we would borrow a few different feet from our office. So you can simply do a footprint test. Basically, get your foot wet, then make a fully weight-bearing footprint. If the shape is a whole foot, then that indicates your feet are flat. If there is only a narrow part of the foot on the outside, that is a high arch, and something in between is more of what we might call a normal arch. All right, now you might have a rough idea of what sort of arch you have, but what are the implications? I mean, could a high arch be as bad as a low arch? Well, I think we'll start by looking at the baseline and a normal arch. Now, I don't like the word normal, but in this case, it does describe it quite well, and it's basically neutral pronation, and this is where your ankle is straight and aligned and facing forwards, and it's the position for your arch that's best designed to absorb shock and distribute weight. A flat foot or a pretty much non-existent arch can cause your foot to roll inwards. Now this, as we mentioned earlier, is known as overpronation, so the foot is moving more in that direction, and that does put more strain further up through the body, and I'm afraid it does apparently mean runners can be more susceptible to a bit of patellofemoral knee pain, so knee pain or anterior knee pain at the front of your kneecap, and some shin splints. Now if your arch is really high, you'll have a tendency to roll outwards onto the outside of your foot. This is known as supination, and yes, it's the opposite to flat feet, but I'm afraid it can still cause some niggles or issues as your foot is just less able to absorb that shock. Now, you might have self-diagnosed what type of foot you have, and you might be panicking if it doesn't fit under the normal arch, but unless you're getting any niggles, then please don't panic, just carry on doing what you're doing. If you do think that you've got flat feet and that could be causing a few issues with your running, well, again, don't panic because there's some easy things that can be done about it. Now, finding the correct footwear for you is essential. This is where I'd suggest going to a specialist running store, and hopefully they'll be able to confirm your self-diagnosis of your arch, but more importantly, they'll be able to analyze your gait, so how your foot actually moves during the running gait. And if you are right with a flat foot diagnosis, then they'll most probably put you in an anti-pronation shoe. And like I said, there are a huge amount to choose from because it is a really common problem, but you might have to experiment with finding the right one for you. Now, if you've got really severe flat feet or collapsed arches, you might have already seen a podiatrist, and maybe you've been prescribed orthotics. And it was actually something that I was prescribed years ago and used in my shoes. But if you have been prescribed orthotics, make sure that you go and buy a neutral shoe, because you don't want that double anti-pronation support. And then if you do have a neutral shoe, you might need to go up half a size to be able to fit your orthotic in. And obviously that's once you've removed the insole. If you do have excessively high arches, then it's likely that you've got tight tendons and muscles both within your foot, but also those that lead into it. So for this, you want to try and focus on some stretches of your calf muscles, but also trying to stretch the underside of your arch and your toes. A nice stretch for the underside of your foot is to extend your toes by placing them against a wall with your heel flat on the ground, and then bend your knee and lean into that. Also, doing toe and foot exercises can help with overall mobility and strength of the foot, which can prevent or reduce the chance of having any issues within it when it comes to running. One exercise that's really easy to do, sit on a chair with your feet flat on the ground, and you want to have a towel or something similar that is soft and movable under your foot. And then you're going to use your toes to try and scrunch it up. This will get all of those intrinsic foot muscles working. A really simple, obvious exercise is calf raises or heel raises, and as the name suggests, they are going to be activating and working your calf muscles, but that will also lead into the tendons that go into your foot and help strengthen your foot as well. And then a more subtle movement, and one that you can do when you're just stood around waiting. If you think about it, if you're standing with both feet flat on the ground, just try to imagine lifting your arches. So you're almost pulling your weight towards the outside of your foot, and it'll be a very minimal movement that someone shouldn't even really notice if you're doing. But it does start to involve some other muscles, which leads me on to the next area that needs addressing: your glutes. Yes, you did hear me right. We're talking about muscles in your bottom when referencing flat feet. Now that is if your glutes are not strong enough or firing properly. When you're running in that stance phase, so the phase when your foot is on the ground, it can cause your hip to drop, and this can then put more pressure on the inside of your knee, causing your knee to slightly move inwards. And as you go down the chain, that has a knock-on effect of your foot and causing you to overpronate. So don't skip those glute exercises or those glute activation works before you go for your run. And finally, go barefoot. Now, you might think that's counterintuitive if you've got flat feet where you need support. And yes, you do need support for walking or standing for long periods of time and for running. Yet, going barefoot will allow you to naturally stretch your foot. And if you're walking on uneven surfaces, it'll also help to wake up those smaller intrinsic muscles we talked about. All right, I think that is enough of us talking about feet. And you have to feel for our cameraman who's not only had to film all these close-ups of our feet, also had to edit it. So I think for that, the least you could do is give us a like.